This podcast contains content that may be disturbing to some audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, hello. You're listening to a special bonus episode of Death Becomes Us, a show where we explore what it means to be alive, to be dead, and everything in between. We're excited to present to you our origin stories like you've never heard them before.
I have been into the paranormal my entire life. It all kind of started when, my father passed away when I was 2 years old. I never really knew him, but I remember my mom mentioning over the years, like every time Christmas would roll around or some sort of special holiday or tradition would roll around, that she always felt like someone was missing. And so she was like, okay, 5 kids, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, everybody's here. And she attributed it to the fact that she thought, dad's probably around. And it's this feeling that I get knowing that he's probably there with all our special occasions. But I remember her talking about that a lot. And also my uncle was the town mortician. I grew up in a really small town of less than 3,000 people. So everybody knew everybody, but he was basically the guy that handled all of the funerals and deaths in the valley. And my cousin was one of my best friends, and I hung out at her house a lot. The funeral home was actually on the basement of their home. And we, as kids, used to go play hide and go seek in the coffins. And don't tell him that. But we had a lot of fun. And to us, like, I guess death was just a part of life. It was part of an everyday thing. Of course, we were always scared about dying or how we were going to die, but it wasn't ever anything that made us nervous. And I remember my uncle would always tell stories about the families that he was able to help while he was doing his thing. And I thought the way he talked about death and the way he was able to help those families always really intrigued me and made me feel like maybe I would like to be like that someday in a moment where people are just not at their best or are really sad. And if there's anything at all that you could make them feel better about, I really admired him for that. And not only that, but he had stories that he would tell about spirits that he would see. He actually had a really cool story one time where he was preparing a young girl who died in a car accident. And I believe she was about 6 years old, and she was kind of injured pretty bad. So he did his best to make her look presentable for the viewing and for the family. And, this was kind of a sad thing. And he actually really kind of struggled with this one. And he said, I remember looking up while I was getting her body ready for the viewing, and she was kind of hovering above her casket, looking at him, watching what he was doing. But she was in perfect form. She didn't have any sort of deformities or anything. She looked perfect. And that moment to him was like, okay, when we pass on into the next life, we're going to be made whole again. And that was kind of how he always spoke about death. And it gave us some comfort. It gave the people that he told these stories to some comfort, and always made me more curious about the afterlife and what happens to us when we pass on. There were also stories where I remember being upstairs in my cousin's home, and we'd be having dinner or whatever, and we'd hear walking downstairs, or we'd hear things shuffle around. And my uncle would always be like, it's okay, got a body down there. They're just down there saying goodbye. They're just down there, kind of doing their thing. Don't worry about it. So it was just a normal thing. I grew up always kind of knowing that there was more to life after this one, and not to be scared of it. My first paranormal experience that I remember vividly happened when I was about 9. I was playing at my grandparents' home, which was just up the road from where I lived. I was riding bikes with my brother, and we were just kind of playing around. My grandparents had a pretty big property, and they had a dairy farm. So there was different roads and paths and stuff for us to ride our bikes on. And it was just it was kind of a rural community. Our our next neighbors, other than my grandpa, were like miles up the road. So there really wasn't anybody around. But my mom used to, when it was time for us to come home and go to dinner, she would honk this horn out the back door so we could hear it and we'd know it was time to come home for dinner. And I remember riding bikes with Steve, not really paying attention to what we were doing, but we were riding around, and my mom honks a horn out the back door. And I was like, oh, Kate, it's time to go. And I thought Steve was right in front of me. There was a little boy right in front of me, and I just really wasn't paying attention. But I saw this little boy peek around the corner of my grandparents' home. And I was like, hey, Steve, it's time to go. So I drove my bike up to the corner real quick. And I looked down the road because I could see the driveway from that corner. And Steven was already headed up the driveway. So I was like, wait a second, who was that little boy? And then it dawned on me that, oh, wait, that couldn't have been Steve because he was really young. I would say maybe 5, 6 tops. He wasn't on a bike. And then I realized, hey, he had on like a baseball cap and overalls. And I had never seen him before. And so I was like, it kind of freaked me out. And I remember hurrying and driving home. But I've never really forgot that experience because it was the first time that I had actually seen what I would call a ghost or a spirit. Years later, as an adult, I remember taking a photo of my youngest son. And that photo, I had flashbacks of that moment where I was at my grandparents' home. That's what I saw. So to this day, I'm like, was that my son that I was playing with in a different, I don't know. It was just really a strange moment for me. And it really made me kind of contemplate and question some things. But I also learned that my grandpa's brother had been buried on the property, and he was very young when he died. So was it him? To this day, I don't know, but it's really made me question quite a few things. My brothers were the caretakers of the local cemetery. I remember going there and helping them move pipe and weed around the graves. And it was always like such a peaceful place. You could go there and just be peaceful, like nobody bothered you, nobody talked back to you, obviously. But I do remember one time we were there kind of late. We had something going on, and so my brothers weren't able to move pipe at the normal time. And so we got there like as it was almost dark. And I remember seeing there's this one headstone there that was really tall and white. And it was either a full moon or kind of a full moon. And that headstone was kind of glowing. And I was like, is that the full moon that's like reflecting off that headstone? And my brother stared at it for a minute and he was like, I have never seen it that bright. So that was kind of an interesting thing. But we also used to, as teenagers, because we lived in such a small town and there was nothing to do, we used to take a TV and like a generator out there and watch like Pet Cemetery or something in the cemetery at nights with our friends. And, I never really thought, now I think back on it and think that might have been a little bit disrespectful, but at the time it was just kind of fun. We also would like go exploring abandoned buildings, and we loved caves. There's a lot of lava tunnels and lava tubes around where we live. And we used to love exploring those creepy old places. One of our favorite places to go explore was the Teton Dam. And we had so much activity there. Like every time we went there, something really strange happened. And to this day, my brother and I still talk about it because, it was creepy and we had some really fun, creepy stories, but it was just part of our teenage years that we remember. We have just so many cool stories. And I don't know what it is about those kind of experiences, but I guess it's that big mystery that you kind of want to solve. It makes you question life. It makes you question what happens after you die, why things happen the way they do, why people experience what they experience. And, another really strange thing is my uncle was the town sheriff in Duchesne County for over 50 years. And we used to go up there and visit him over the summers. And he, in the 50s, 60s in Utah, there was a huge string of UFO activity. And it seems like every week there was another story popping up and another person down in that area who had seen something strange. And there's even a book about it. It's called The Utah UFO Display. And it's written by I think it's his last name is Salisbury. I can't remember his first name, but he's a professor up at Utah State University, which is where I work now. But he wrote this book, and my uncle wasn't named in it, but they talked about the town sheriff. So I'm sure that's who he was. But he had so many stories. And I remember when we were there in the summers, he would tell us these stories. And sometimes he would wait to tell the scarier ones when all the kids had gone to bed and it was just the adults. But I remember sneaking into the hallway and just listening to him tell those stories because I was so fascinated by all of that. And then, later on, we now know that area is Skinwalker Ranch, where still to this day, really strange occurrences happen, and not just UFO activity, but skinwalkers and cryptids and paranormal, all sorts of strange things. So I think a lot of what my two uncles shared, my upbringing, being able to be around funeral homes and cemeteries, just really sparked my curiosity. As I got older, I started studying the paranormal more and more. I remember reading as much as I could get my hands on. Every single TV show I watched was about the paranormal in some way. If it wasn't paranormal, if the movie didn't have ghosts or aliens or Bigfoot, I could have cared less about watching it. Loved horror movies, loved the thrill of being scared and not knowing what was going to happen. But I decided after I got my bachelor's degree in human development with a minor in psychology, just very fascinated by how the mind works. I decided to continue on and get my master's and my PhD in metaphysical humanistic science with a specialty in parapsychology. And I still, to this day, I'm still taking classes at the Ryan Institute. I've taken classes from Duke University, Yale, Edinburgh College, just because the study intrigues me so much and I want to know as much as I can. And one year for Christmas, my husband gave me some paranormal equipment. He gave me a spirit box, an EMF detector, and an EVP recorder. And the brother, Mike, that we actually started a podcast and stuff together called Destination Mystery, but we decided to go on our very first actual paranormal investigation with actual equipment. And we had some friends who owned the girls' reformatory school. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's in St. Anthony, Idaho, which is where we grew up. And growing up, that was one of those other places that everybody knew was haunted, and we would try to sneak in there and investigate. So our friends own this. They said, come on in. We're having a New Year's Eve party. You guys are free to go kind of wander upstairs and just do what you want to do. So they actually opened the very top floor of that building for us to go check out. It had been sealed off for, I think they said 50 years. There were two different stories as to why. The first story was because it was just unsafe and they didn't want anybody up there. The second story was that there was a nurse who had been pushed down the stairs because there had been so much paranormal activity up there, and so many people had experienced that paranormal activity that they decided to close it off because it was unsafe. And so, whichever story it is, but they actually walled the whole thing off and you couldn't even get to the stairs. But our friends decided to unwall it and fix the stairs. And other than them going up and kind of cleaning it, nobody had really been up there. So we decided to go up there and do the very first spirit box session that we had ever done before, and really wasn't expecting anything to happen. So it was me, my brother, and some of his daughters. So these daughters were about the age of what the girls in this home would have been, teenage girls that were there. So I think that kind of helped us be able to communicate. But about 4 minutes into this session, I remember saying, if there's anybody here, can you say hello? And we got 2 young females and they said, hello, hello. And you could hear it very clear. And I remember grabbing my niece's hand who was sitting to the right of me. And I was like, holy shit, did you just hear that? And everybody was like, this actually works. Like, is somebody actually here? And we started asking questions. We got some names. One of the names, we thought that she said Jody. But after we started searching around the rooms a little bit more, we noticed that some of the girls had written their names on the window sills, on the door frames of the rooms. And there was a Jory that was written up there with a date. And so we were like, oh, maybe that's what we heard. But we also got the name Marie and I think it was Ruth. And we also found all those names written on the window sills or the door frames of those rooms. And so, I mean, we were just kind of blown away because we knew a little bit of the history of the place, but these names had never come up. We'd never experienced that before. We actually, got a few voices that came across. We got an EVP on my recorder of it sounded like a little girl crying. And from that day forward, it was like, we just had to know more. And so I got more and more equipment. I started learning how the equipment worked. We started putting that together with history. We started researching places a lot more so that we could ask the right questions, especially when we would get like different forms of evidence. For example, my brother would get a really cool photo on his thermal imager and I would get an EVP at the same time, just really kind of not only magnified the experience, but made it seem more real and really, if you can collect more than one piece of evidence at a time, it's like, wow, when my spidey senses go off or I get that little chill and at the same time the EMF spikes or the temperature drops or something like that, it really kind of made me think, oh, I need to pay closer attention to these little changes in my body or what I'm feeling, because I think this is paranormal. It's not just me getting the chills. It's not just, a thought popping into my head out of the blue. It's like, I think it's actual activity. And, I started really exploring psychic abilities and how people are able to interpret what they hear, see, and feel. And I started helping people with these abilities use them better, be able to recognize how the information comes across to them so that they can interpret it better. And it's been really fun to learn and grow in that area as well. The other big thing that I am hugely passionate about is near-death experiences. I did my thesis on it. I interviewed, I think at least 120 people with near-death experiences. And it was kind of crazy because I remember I knew a few people personally that I interviewed. And then I put this link, not a link, but a little shout out on Instagram. And it said, hey, I'm collecting near-death experiences. If you know of anyone that would like to share, or you've had one on your own, reach out to me. And I could not believe the amount of people that actually reached out to me. And I discovered that, to me, some of these near-death experiences are the closest evidence that we may have that life exists beyond just this world. All these experiences, although they were different, they were the same. People experienced a tunnel, usually a tunnel of light. They all experienced this extreme sense of peace and calm. And I noticed also that they experienced kind of what would be their belief system. So, for example, I grew up as a Mormon, as a Latter-day Saint, and people that I interviewed who grew up in that same religion would describe what they would call the celestial room in the temple, for example, and that's what they saw, and that's where they ended up going. That's where they met Christ. There were other people that I interviewed who were like in the Buddhist faith, and they described maybe going and seeing a Buddhist temple. But to me, it was like, oh, when we die, maybe we're able to see what we're familiar with to kind of help us transition into this new, I have a hard time with words, really difficult realm. Yeah, this new existence or whatever it is. But yeah, I kind of, wondered if that's how we transition into the next realm, because it helped them really become more comforted and more calm. And of course, these people all returned home, but all of them didn't really want to. Like, they knew they were going to miss their family and friends, but they said they felt such a sense of peace that they really just wanted to stay. But one other like strange thing, I also interviewed a lot of people who had just out of body experiences. And I have actually had one. When I was in the fourth grade, I was in a really bad car accident. And it was weird because I remember we were getting ready for school. My mom's like, hurry up, we're late, blah, blah, blah. Everybody was in the car honking at me. And I was like, I gotta go to the bathroom. And so I ran to the bathroom real quick. And I had this sense that something bad was about to happen. And I couldn't really place it, but I decided to say a prayer because that's what I knew growing up. And that's what comforted me. So I remember saying a prayer, got into the car. And as we were crossing a 4-lane highway, we were struck by a truck that was pulling a snowmobile trailer. So, and we're in this tiny little Toyota. The truck hit the front end and the snowmobile trailer came around and hit the back end. So it basically like smashed the car into an accordion. And me and my two brothers that were in the back seat flew out of the car. And I just remember flying through the air. I don't remember actually going through the window or feeling any pain whatsoever. It was just like I was flying through the air and somebody was there catching me or making sure that I can't even explain it, but I didn't feel anything. Even after I woke up and realized I was on the side of the road, I had actually hit the highway on my face and kind of skid along. So it took off like chunks of my skin. I had glass coming out. I had cuts everywhere. But I didn't actually feel anything until my brother who had actually flown further, I got up and I went to go see if he was okay. And he looked at me and he goes, your face is gone. And I was like, what? And so we ran back to the car. My mom and sister had actually passed out in the front seat. And my other brother was crying. He's like, they're dead. They're dead. And I just knew, I had this sense of calm. And I said, no, they're passed out. Everything's going to be fine. And then I remember looking at myself in the mirror and I was like, oh my gosh, that's when the pain hit. But to me, it was an out of body experience because I don't know how else to describe me flying through the air and not feeling anything. But yeah, I mean, my mom always said, your prayer's what saved us. So I'm very excited to do this podcast because I want to dig into the science behind the paranormal. A lot of people think it's all woo-woo. There's a million different podcasts about, people telling ghost stories and talking about paranormal investigations. But for me, I want to dive deeper. And I've been really excited to interview some of these guests with different expertise and different experiences that really kind of open your eyes to what the possibilities are, what the possibilities could be. I feel like we're on the verge of actually discovering and being able to prove some of these theories and some of the paranormal activity. I mean, in the past, you had electricity and gravity, which were all kind of considered woo-woo or pseudoscience. More and more, we're able to use the scientific method to recreate events. Not that we can in all areas. It's really hard to put paranormal activity in a lab to recreate a lot of it. But being able to use this different equipment and make the different equipment better and learn how it's used and learn how some of these theories behind metaphysics and quantum physics and physics in general really could be used to explain what's going on. I remember the first time I ever heard Dr. Travis Taylor speak, I was so totally enthralled. I could have listened to him for days. If you don't know who he is, he's an astrophysicist. I think he has a couple of other master's degrees also, but he is the lead investigator for the Skinwalker Ranch team. And the thing that I love about him is that he can say, okay, we don't know that a UFO can go through a mountain. We don't know that it can travel through a mountain. However, people say that it's happened, and he'll be able to take his expertise in physics and in astrophysics and explain how that really could be possible. And I want to be able to also do that with the paranormal science. I really want to explain how psychic activity works, how brainwaves, how we can actually document the brainwave activity, things like that. And it's been really exciting to speak to some of these guests and get their take on it. Every aspect and spectrum of the paranormal we're going to be covering. It's just been a lot of fun. I'm super passionate about it. Although it's not provable yet, I think we're getting there, and I think we're right there. We are so close to being able to see all that and actually prove the existence of it, and I want to be part of that.
If you loved what you heard today, please consider leaving us a review. Death Becomes Us is an Emotional Pictures production produced by Sarah Nichols and Alex Eisenstein.